I want to welcome Tim. I'm delighted he's found the time to come along and talk to us. It's been a time of huge pressure for him in lots of different kinds of ways, including the launch of his new book. And of course, it's a privilege of me to have the opportunity of introducing him to you because because of his father, really, that I'm sitting here, and it's because that's when I first met him as a young, very energetic medical student. And I think what has been shown is that the energy certainly hasn't changed very much over the years. Tim.
Thanks very much, David. Thanks very much for the invitation to talk to you guys. I want to what plan was to show about a dozen slides and then get into some Q&A, really, which I always a bit more interesting, and try and keep it lively and topical. So I'll share my screen now, and if I can then find my slides, which I think I should be able to do, but there you go. Oh, right. There's my. There you go. Okay, and right. So you should be seeing this. I'm ended up talking about COVID, which I hadn't heard of at all, really before about December. And I was no expert at all, but like most people, had to learn on the job. But I didn't realize I was going to be involved really at all in this until March. But it's ended up being a bit of a roller coaster ride. We've now got over 4 million people who've downloaded the app, which was done on a shoestring, and helping the NHS, the Department of Health. And it really came about as a strange mixture of collaborations, really, because at the time, you got to remember, in mid-March, I was working on a nutrition prediction app with a company called Zoe, trying to really do really huge studies to work out why everyone responds differently to food, and see if we can use that algorithm to give people ideal diets. And we were just wrapping up really the last of the twin studies of this, because that's my other day job, running the twin research department at King's. And they started shutting down our facilities, saying it's unsafe to have any research going on for COVID, basically everyone go home. And so cycling home, I came up with the idea of doing something in COVID so that I wouldn't get bored and we could actually do something useful. And that was really trying to give the twins, with these 12,000 twins we have around the country, an app that they could record their symptoms or not, and their status during the what we thought was going to be a rather short epidemic, I think, in March. And it turned out to be longer. And I spoke to this company, Zoe, and they're a small startup around the corner. And basically they said, we'll drop everything, we'll design you an app in 4 days that's going to, it will be world beating. And well, it certainly beat the world in terms of one of the fastest ones. And amazingly, these guys did it, and within 24 hours, we had 1 million people download it. It just went viral via social media. So it was very exciting. And after 3 weeks, we had 2 million, and then we're up to over 4 million people. And again, this is without any marketing or budget or anything, any backing from the NHS. And we initially had real problems getting any recognition or funding, and actually several people tried to shut us down because we hadn't cleared it with all the authorities, and everyone was saying, oh, is it legal, and have you really, you can't use our name, etc., etc. And different people tried different threats, etc. But eventually people came on board, and the Scottish government and the Welsh government thought this was a great idea, and the NHS then backed us and we were able to use their logos, and others followed, and we got all the Royal Colleges eventually on board. And then the people that were trying to stop us eventually came round and said, okay, we always thought it was a great idea. You carry on and use our logos. And the whole idea was you could predict in times without any testing symptomatic COVID using machine learning. The idea was by asking people how they were in this very complex disease, rather using 20 symptoms rather than the government's 2 at the time, we could learn much more about it and actually get an idea of whether people were likely to be infectious. When nobody, unless you were half dead, you really couldn't get a test. And that's where it all started. So it was getting people to log every day, looking at these patterns, and we managed to do this pretty well. And we started collecting this data very rapidly. People seemed to really like having someone to talk to because all their GPs and local hospitals are saying, unless you're, you can't breathe, don't come anywhere near us. We don't want to know unless you've got a persistent cough or fever. We also don't want to know because you haven't got COVID. And everyone was quite happy to talk to our app in a way and get some localized information. And then we started getting self-reports of people having swab testing. So that was initially how we got our predicted set, so we could tell how people were doing, because these tests were, we said in this small group, say of about 2,000 people had a positive test out of say 2 or 3 million, what were their characteristics of symptoms compared to the people who had a negative test? And that was really our learning model that we used then to predict outwards. So that's what we did. And then as we got well known, I struck up a relationship with Sir Patrick Vallance, who was very keen on the data, and he allowed us to start getting the Department of Health to give us some tests every week so we could send people requests when they got sick. So we started a survey by May that was basically a daily survey of swab testing that was very helpful. Now, what was great was all the people that helped out, and this combination of the academics with the amazing software engineers and data processors at Zoe. There was a big team, not only in my department, but also in the bioengineering department at King's. A big group had just recently moved about a year before from UCL, run by Sébastien Orsolin. And these are people who need the skills to deal with big data, because very soon we were dealing with millions of records, and every day this data has to be crunched in order to give us up-to-date results. And so we now, with our 4 million users and about 1.5 million daily loggers, we have about over 180 million individual symptom reports. And this is a huge number for us to deal with, but these guys make it all happen. And we were able to get out a couple of really key papers in Nature Medicine and Science, as well as all these others about the various risk factors, which we can perhaps discuss as time goes, if we have time. But I think the real thing that we did was highlight that this wasn't just like flu. This was an extraordinary illness that was extremely complex and crossed many different specialities. And before I come back to that, we also were able to highlight in those early stages, when no one knew what was going on, some of these hotspots that were going on. And we picked this is just an example of one of the hotspots that the map picked up in South Wales, near Gwent, which had happened very early on because of a combination of rugby matches and music concerts, etc. And this really helped the Welsh government, and that was why they were very keen on our app as an early warning device. We also, since May, have been picking up these daily incidence rates, and this is today's figure, which all of you, as I'm sure you're logging on the app, will be able to see for yourselves, because we give extra data to the people who log on the app, these special privileges, and you can see that these are based on rolling averages, but give the idea that really since beginning of September, things have been rocketing upwards across the UK, particularly in the northwest. But the only slight good news is the last 3 days, rates have stopped going up, and that's some potential good news there. And the R value has dropped from about 1.4 to 1.3, and we might be seeing some plateauing. But this is really fast time survey, so we're giving the data of what happened 4 days ago, which is, I think, faster than anyone else gives it at the moment. And our survey is slightly larger than the ONS survey, which generally we get similar results to, although ours is the UK and theirs just England. Now, delving a bit into these symptoms again, which I think is really interesting, and that's where the app comes into its own, because it is quite unique in the world in that we don't just ask cross-sectionally, what symptoms did you have? We ask it over time. And so the symptoms will vary. So it's not like, you get a normal flu and you just hit in 48 hours, you get everything and then that's it. This is very different. And these were the first symptoms we saw based on 2.8 million people. And very early on, we saw that loss of smell was by far and away the strongest risk factor. So we got an odds ratio of over 10 for having a positive test, which was higher than anorexia, skipping meals, higher than fatigue, and particularly higher than fever and cough. And so this is really important to us. And so we made a big fuss in the media and tried to convince the government to add this to their list, because at this point, there were about 20% of people who had loss of smell who didn't have the fever or cough, who weren't even allowed to have a test and were told just to carry on working in the health sector, even as doctors. So this was really important to us. But basically, if you had loss of smell, you really didn't need a PCR test. It was just so good. And we've confirmed this with antibodies, as about 90% of people with loss of smell seem to have antibodies in the first 6 weeks. And we've extended this recently to all age groups, and the odds ratio seems to be even stronger in our more recent data. And more recently, we added skin rashes to that list. It comes above fever and cough as well as another factor. There were a lot of politics went on, and it did take us about 7 weeks before the Public Health England agreed to actually add it to the list of official symptoms, which time, 7 weeks, a lot of people had got infected and caused problems. But nevertheless, we were eventually successful. The government said that it wasn't important enough to add. They didn't show the data that was based on. And so in the Lancet, we published this data showing this Venn diagram showing how fever, cough, and smell often go together. But there are this group of people around 1 in 5, 1 in 6 people who really never get the other symptoms, and how important it was. So we made that point, and actually loss of smell would be a better screening test in the first week than fever, which is pretty lousy, as you can see, because if people only having fever is about 5%, and it only lasts for about 2 days. The other thing we found was that we were getting these clusters, and we found that by putting both the time and the type of symptom into our models, we were seeing at least 5 or 6 different types of COVID. And as the red suggests, it went from sort of mild correlations to strong ones, and clusters 4 and 5 are associated with increased risk of being admitted to hospital. And generally they tended to be people with respiratory problems. And you could use algorithms in the first week to predict which one you're likely to be. So we think with a bit more work, this could be a really useful clinical tool. Identify people, particularly with breathing problems, early on, so they would get pulse oximeters, etc. And that's one of the things we're working on, as well as working on these who might get these illnesses for long duration. And you might have heard of long COVID, and we do see certain clusters that do suggest someone's going to get long COVID. It's not clear cut, but we think we can recognize that. And it might just be the number of different symptoms that people get. So in a way, if it's a multi-system disease, a bit like an autoimmune disease, affecting most bits of the body, that might be the thing that triggers this long-term problems of fatigue, headache, and appetite and GI problems and breathing. So no one was quite sure how long this lasted, and obviously our data helped us. This is slightly out of date, but roughly correct, that we were told this was like a flu and should all be over within a week initially. Then they got extended, and our median duration is about 10 to 12 days. But there's a clear tail here, so that we're seeing at about 30 days, you've still got about 10% of people having problems, and that goes down to about 3 or 4% at 2 months and about 2% at 3 months. So that's something we're really looking at, and this has been really invaluable at trying to uncover what's going on in long COVID. And we have thousands of people now logging, telling us about the symptoms, and we're trying to keep up with the different symptoms. Some of them do vary for people who've had it for a long time. Other symptoms such as tachycardia, hair loss, and even skin rashes and fever can still occur 3 months after or 6 months after the initial insult. There's a lot more I could say. I will briefly mention we also did a nutrition survey during which we're about to publish, and looked at vitamins. Can't tell you the results of those yet, but we'll do soon. So 2 million people filled in our questionnaire about vitamins, and we got the data back within a few days. This is, this is real epidemiology done. It would take 5 years, and you do it in 5 days. It's the new technology. It's quite amazing. So it's a very exciting time. And it was interesting for me because I'd been working on nutrition for the last few years. Although as some of you have followed what I do, I do tend to change subject every few years to what I think is the most interesting, exciting, and I'm lucky enough to have a job that allows me to do that. And the similarities between COVID and nutrition are quite similar, because clearly we're all unique in both our response to food and our response to COVID. The risk factors for are quite similar in terms of, we think that a bad gut microbiome might be crucial for both in having a bad response to food metabolically, but also to COVID in terms of a poor immune response. And the risk factors of obesity, diabetes, deprivation also are very similar. And the fact that we were given this one-size-fits-all guidelines for both nutrition and for how we were told COVID should run its course. We're still being told by the government, 7 months on, that there's only 3 symptoms, and our data clearly show that in the elderly and in the young, the three classic symptoms don't work either. And again, this is a bit like this forced nutrition advice we've been given. And so this is all part of my some angry rant in my book, Spoon-Fed, which David referred to, which got me really interested in the politics of food and how we end up trying to oversimplify everything because we have this fear that if you don't, no one will understand anything, rather than trying to educate people. And I really feel quite passionately that we should be educating people about the symptoms of COVID, just like the complexities of what is a good diet, rather than dumbing it down to the lowest common denominator, which is often wrong, and accepting that as a gold standard. So I'll stop there and have any questions. I'll stop sharing my screen, and hopefully there will be, I will have stimulated a few questions on that route, and I'm happy to take questions on diet, nutrition, gut health, COVID, long COVID, and the NHS app, but not too much about politics, hopefully.
First of all, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. The summary of a huge amount of work and a huge amount of endeavor. The one question is, this is not the NHS app, right? This is a different app, entirely different app that you sign on to separately. And can you sign on to both?
Yes, well, this has been going since March the 24th. The NHS app was due to be launched in April, then it was due to be launched in May, then June, then September, and then it finally did launch end of last week, and it's completely different. And you can have both. They are not in any way incompatible. Ours is a research tool that relies on symptoms and doesn't track you as an individual. It just tracks your area and uses your data confidentially for research purposes. Whereas the NHS app just gets your data once and tracks where you are and sees whether you've been to a place where someone else might have COVID, and they will then link you up via Bluetooth. So the NHS app only has very limited research possibilities, and it still only is interested in the three classic symptoms. It's not interested in anything else. So if you're over the age of 65, it will miss 50% of the symptoms that people would have with COVID. But it is a useful tracking device if enough of the population do use it. So that's sort of where we are, but I think that we'll wait and we won't know whether it's a success or not for a few weeks, but I'd like people to use both, try both, but our one doesn't drain your battery, and it's not used by, it doesn't go to Russia or anywhere else to spy on people.
Right. Okay. So we've got quite a good number of questions here already. First of all, why have the UK gone down nasal swab route when so much manpower and takes days to be done? And related to that, there's the saliva test, which has been described from Ben Gurion University in the Negev. What about? Do you know anything about that test as an alternative to the swab test? Alternatives to the swab test, or? Yeah,
I think saliva's coming, and I heard that Canada just switched, or at least some of the provinces in Canada have switched to saliva. So I think my guess is that within a month we'll be seeing something in this country that the system would change saliva, which is probably, from my understanding, we've done some tests on it, limited, but others, I think at Imperial and Southampton have done some bigger tests, and it's looking as good and a lot easier to handle. And certainly kids will go back twice to spit in a tube where they don't want some swab stuck up their nose painfully twice.
Right, and has any of your data had the kind of prophetic element about it, that you've got robust data to show that you've collected a number of samples, like the Welsh ones? Could you predict where the next Welsh one was going to be in any kind of way?
Yes, well, we've been running a watch list. So the government has had its own watch list, which is based on actual tests. Ours are based on symptom reports, and so we were able to predict quite a few areas. We were coming up with a top 10 list. This is about a month ago, before the sort of second wave kicked off, and we think we had reasonable accuracy on those areas according to the government for those predictions. So we were just seeing when one area, like a local authority, was starting to report greater numbers than the areas around it, and so we used an algorithm to say, well, there seems to be a cluster of something going on there, and then I'd say we were right about 70% of the time, and so that was useful for the local authorities to then do more testing and see if we were correct or not. Although some people in the mayors of some of those places got very angry that we were targeting them because they wanted tourism, etc.
Are you collecting data on children? What age range are you going for?
Yes, we have for the last 4 months been collecting data reported by their parents. So we have about 300,000 children on our books, and we've started doing some pilot studies with schools, so they can report the schools they're at and their bubbles. And so we can try and see if doing this is a good way to monitor what's going on without having weekly testing every time some child gets a cold. Right. So the children are interesting because they have different symptoms to adults. They don't get the respiratory symptoms. They get more gastro ones and go off their food more. And you may have to test them to see if they've got anosmia. So these are things that we're trying to educate people with through our app.
There are two things about gut. One is whether one should eat prophylactic yogurt, and secondly, can you improve your microbiome and thus reduce the chances of getting COVID?
Yes to both is my answer. I'm a big believer in fermented foods. So my previous book, The Diet Myth, had a fair bit on this discussion, and really that data is getting stronger. I mean, it's still not solid. No, there aren't massive RCTs, but I think there's good enough reason to have a small amount of fermented food every day. It doesn't have to be a large amount because it doesn't stay in the stomach for long, but it does seem to have a powerful impact on the other microbes who are there. So full fat yogurt, don't have any of this low fat rubbish, and try kefir, which is like super yogurt, which is fermented milk, or sauerkraut, kimchi, or for the adventurous, fermented tea, which is kombucha, which comes from Manchuria or Russia, depending on where you think. So they're all good. And I believe that if you have a good microbiome, a gut microbiome, that means that you have good diversity of species. So you've got many more different species than someone with a bad gut health. And basically your microbes are like chemical factories. They produce perhaps 30,000 different metabolites, and many of these are geared at interacting with your immune system, which has most of the cells of the immune system are in the gut. and lining the gut. And so there's a really strong link between a healthy gut microbiome and a healthy immune system. So I think for people who don't want to take Donald Trump's advice and take chloroquine or bleach, I think having a healthy gut through various things you can do, and one of them is regular fermented foods, and don't forget good cheese as well. So if it's high quality cheese, ideally unpasteurized, that's also an excellent source of regular microbes. So yes, keep your gut healthy, and your immune system should stay healthy with you, because there is a big age effect on the gut microbiome that may well be related to diet, as people get into ruts and always have the same foods and start missing out on some of the diversity. And this is really important because we've done various studies on the gut microbiome where we looked at 11,000 people from the US and the UK. We did a project called the British Gut Project. And the people who had the healthiest gut microbes were the ones eating 30 different plants a week. And a plant can be everything from a nut, a seed, a grain, or a herb. It don't have to have 30 types of kale. It's just, it's a mixture. So that's really important. And it didn't matter whether you had a bit of meat, bit of fish, bit of smoked salmon. You didn't have to be vegan. It was what else was on the plate was really important. So this is this idea of the diversity of plants feeds a diversity of microbes. So if you do that, plus you've got the fermented foods, then you're doing it, most of the things you need to do for your gut.
Now, there are two questions before we go on to the respiratory ones. There are one or two other questions. One is the question about the relationship with your twin studies. Have you come across anything in your twin studies about dealing and coping with COVID-19? And there is a strong feel that there must be some genetic component in this. Do you have anything?
Well, I've studied hundreds of diseases now with the twins, and it's very rare to find anything that doesn't have a genetic component. And so our first study we did was we looked at about 300 twins and saw 10% had COVID symptoms. This is quite early on, and we did see a greater sharing of the symptoms in the identical twins than the non-identical twins, such that we got heritabilities around 40 to 50%. But our numbers weren't really big, so we haven't made a big fuss of that, because also it could have been that the identical twins were slightly seeing each other more than the non-identical twins. But definitely there seemed to be something genetic about the huge differences between how people express the virus. So some people, completely asymptomatic, but had the virus. Others would have 10 different symptoms and end up in ICU. So we were definitely getting a feeling that some of that is genetic. We then went on to do a study. This is many of my team at King's. We hired some cars. We got 3 cars and with drivers and a nurse, and we went and bled about 500 twins and looked at their antibodies. This is about 6 weeks later. And we looked at their antibody levels, and we're still analyzing the results, but we found about 12% of them had antibodies. These were in some London and the southeast, so slightly higher rates than have been reported elsewhere. And we saw again about just over 55% genetic effect of the antibody titers. So some people were infected and didn't have antibodies, some people were affected and did have antibodies. And again, genes seem to be playing a role, but certainly didn't explain it all, because we did have quite a few identical twins where one had antibodies and the other didn't, and they were living together. So clearly there's other things going on, and this is something, a question I've been thinking about a lot, and it's come up in nutrition about, two twins live together, one's 20 kilos heavier than the other. How does that happen? They're identical. And one of the things that's most unique about us all, because even we're probably fifth cousins, David, or fourth cousins. Everyone's related, and we share 99.5% of our DNA, but we only share about 25% of our gut microbes, and that's in species. And if you go down to the strain level, we're all pretty unique. And I think, given that we now know about the gut microbiome and the immune system, it makes sense that this part of this unique reaction to something like a virus is due to our very diverse microbiomes and the genes that those microbes have, producing different chemicals that signal our immune cells differently. So that's what we think is happening. There's something genetic, but then you've got this uniqueness about all of us, which comes from our environment, because our genetics don't really make up much of our gut microbes. Most of that is environmental. It's our diet. It's our habitat, whether we're in the country or in cities.
Which operates at a kind of epigenetic level. Is that the way you see it?
I think so, yeah. I mean, depending how you define epigenetic, but it's because they've got, we've always considered ourselves as complete. We all just think, we're just skin, bone, and genes. The genes produce proteins, and that does the work. But then suddenly we've got this whole other organ in our bodies, the gut microbiome, which has as many cells as we have cells in our body, 100 trillion of them, and it has 200 times more genes. So it's capable of producing many more chemicals than we can, and modulating all our proteins and hormones and signals that we send out. So it's sort of, in a way, conceptually you can think of it as epigenetic, but it also, it's like we've got these competing forces within our body. Yeah. And this sort of symbiotic relationship of how our own genes, might want something to happen, but actually, if it involves the gut or the food or our fuel system, then it's got to deal with the vagaries of the gut genes as well. So I think this is a really interesting concept that's come up, that's likely to be true in our response to a virus, just in the way that we showed in our PREDICT studies, which series of studies we've just published in Nature Medicine, about how we all respond differently to identical foods. And we see the gut microbiome is not the only thing that affects it, but one of the key players in affecting that individuality. And I think it's this really new concept in medicine, really, that we can suddenly talk about this new organ and understanding it in how it interacts with our brain, our immune system, our gut, in ways we couldn't have comprehended 10 years ago.
One question has come in about the antibodies as well. Is the whole question of different infectious diseases have different percentage requirements for herd immunity, and is there any evidence that you can predict, whether this one will require 10% herd immunity, 50% herd immunity, 90% herd immunity? Will it be like measles or like HPV, for example? Is it
I don't think I've got any idea, except all I would say is that the number of proven cases of reinfection is pretty low. And I've been, so we've had of the 4 million people who've downloaded the app, you know, probably 400,000 or something have got affected, and we put calls out for people who's had it twice, and you know, there's a couple who think they have, but the risk seems tiny. So, you know, every evidence is pointing out that the immunity certainly lasts at least 6 months, and so you know, could well be quite good. So, I think that's the one thing I'm fairly more optimistic about, is that this immunity thing might be shielding us and might be protecting, for example, people in London who bore the brunt of the first wave from a second wave. Because if our estimates are correct, 12% of the population have antibodies. We think that half the people who get infected produce antibodies, the other half don't. So that was maybe 25% of London got infected in the first wave. And you know, half the population are shielding and staying at home. The other half, maybe they're the ones who, maybe 50% of those had the infection. And so that's why it's not traveling around as fast in that group. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I don't think anyone really knows, because, you know, we've only gone 6 months now.
And how long more do you think it's going to be going at the present moment? Do you think we're going to have a third wave?
Yes. I think there'll be successive waves of this. You know, it's a worldwide phenomenon. It's not something that peters out in one corner of the world like other ones have, like MERS and SARS. You know, every single country's got it. It's going to be years before every country is vaccinated properly. So I think we're just going to have to live with this, certainly for 2 or 3 years, I'd imagine. But hopefully, you know, my hope is it will get less of a problem, and there are signs that it, you know, we're treating it better. We'll be able to deal with long COVID better. You know, all these things hopefully will improve.
Well, before we go to long COVID, there are a couple of respiratory questions. One question is from Nicola Marks in relationship to this the second wave, is that the suggestion is that there may be the people coming into hospital may be less severely affected than earlier on, and whether the app supports this idea. But also, is there any evidence that the kind of steps taken, the social steps taken, distancing, masks and so on, are therefore having an effect on the viral load and therefore having an effect on the severity?
These are all conjectures. I don't think there's any evidence. And of course, we're looking at associations all the time.
Yeah. So
these are the classic epidemiological observations where you can have a variety of different conclusions depending on what your point of view is. And you can see how often the scientific medical community is divided into these two groups. One that say that, you know, we're overestimating everything and it's this is just the natural course. And the other is saying it's vital we lock down for years in order to eradicate this. You know, there's no doubt that in total lockdown, we did see a dramatic fall in the virus, but viruses do run its course anyway. And there are some countries that didn't really lock down and still saw a plateauing and a drop in the peak. There's certainly evidence that infections may be milder than they were. There's certainly less deaths relative to the number of infections than there were in April. And, you know, we're seeing smaller numbers affected. Some of that is due to younger people now having the virus. I think a lot of the first wave, a lot of people, elderly people were predominant. For some reason, young people didn't seem to get it as much. And that might be one reason. So I think we've got to keep an open mind on this stuff. I don't think anyone really knows, but, you know, but I try and I tweet about this a lot, and I try and sort of show both sides of the equation. There are some who believe, for example, that, you know, these viruses have a natural path anyway, and that we're overblowing the extent to which we can affect it. And others think that we can totally control it through these statistics. Probably it's somewhere in the middle, and that these waves will happen. It's so infectious that you certainly can't stop it unless you're some small island and a long way from anywhere.
One of the questions relating to that, though, is that chronic people with chronic respiratory disease apparently didn't get as badly affected as was expected. Is there any?
Yeah.
Has that come through in your analysis?
Well, we certainly didn't see. I mean, everyone was saying, "Oh, if you've got asthma, you're definitely going to be dead by within a month," and that didn't happen at all. Mm-hmm. They also said people on steroids would be terribly affected, and they weren't. So, in a way, there was a sort of blanket panic went out, saying everyone with any sort of risk factor, should hide, and it turned out to be the metabolic ones. So, it was obesity and diabetes were the real ones that caused the problem with slight, heart disease, number 3. But as you said, respiratory disease strangely didn't seem to be affected. And there was some strange stuff about smokers as well, that something about smoking, maybe this is what prevented the getting infected in the first place. And it could be that people with respiratory problems, it was harder for the virus to enter. And so they had less problems, although maybe once infected, they might have had it more severely, but they might have been relatively protected. So there were all these kind of weird dichotomies that came up in our data we couldn't always explain. And we had this strange thing with ACE inhibitors as well at the beginning that we confused us a lot. So, you might have been more susceptible to get it, but then if you did get it, you had a milder disease, and so that I think there were 2 things going on here. One is whether you're susceptible to, did the virus land on your mucosa and stick and replicate? And the other is, how did your body react to it, which might be 2 separate phenomena.
I mean, which were the 3 main features that predicted the severe symptoms in your bar chart with the reds and blues?
I think it was, we're just talking about symptoms here. I mean, so, so it was shortness of breath was definitely, so if you had, severe fatigue and shortness of breath and the cough, then they were the ones. And it lasted, a week or more. Whereas if you had a sort of short, sharp fever, the chills, the muscle aches, the fever, and maybe the loss of smell, it was unlikely to go that way. Or you had the gastro symptoms. So there seem to be different patterns going that way.
And you did mention long COVID, which is a terminology which I personally think is most odd. But that constellation of symptoms, is this common in younger people, older people? Is there any pattern to those, given the fact that, of course, it hasn't been going quite long enough to pick up all of those?
Well, we've been tracking it, and of course, it was a bit of a shock when people kept saying, emailing me and saying, I've been logging on your app for 40 days now, and I've still got exactly the same symptoms. And we didn't believe the first few of them. We said they were just a bit crazy, but turned out they weren't. And the symptoms that people do report long term are they are severe fatigue, they are headaches, they are loss of smell and shortness of breath. They're the main ones, but they can also, we've got people at 3 months still with fever intermittently. We've got people with skin rashes intermittently at 3 months, which is more a sort of vasculitis type rash on the fingers and toes. So people are getting these. So it looks like immune reactions carrying on. So I am taking these seriously, and I think these constellation of symptoms really to call out for people to start thinking of this more as like treating it like a connective tissue disease type problem, rather than just someone who's depressed after a virus infection.
There's a chronic, in other words, you're talking about chronic disease.
Yes, well, once it's got to 3 months, I'm starting to call it chronic COVID, which I think to me makes more sense.
Thank you. We agree.
But no one's agreed yet on what we call it. So we're writing a paper on it. So hopefully we can try and get that forward. But obviously, before you've got data, you really need 6 months data to be sure what 3 months really means. And so there's a danger we'll get it wrong. But I think the key point here is that, if 1 in 50 people who get symptoms do have chronic COVID, that could end up being more of a problem than, the 20,000 excess deaths or each year or whatever it is that we might be seeing. And I think this is something that the medical establishment haven't come to deal with, because if that's true, that's 60,000 people in the first wave, maybe another, who knows, 40,000 in the second wave, and that's just in the UK, 100,000 people with, really a whole constellation of symptoms that, we might know as, looks a bit like straight mild lupus or something else like this, that does need quite detailed investigation. Many may have heart problems, need MRIs, and have neurological, deficits, etc. So there
is the question whether it's the younger adults who are getting the syndrome.
We're not seeing. Well, we don't see it much in the over 65s. You'll be pleased to know.
That's because those ones have been.
And we don't see it in the under 18. So it is seen to be 18 to 65, and our peak age is about 45. And looks like about 70% female, but still enough males to, it's not like an autoimmune disease completely, but does seem to be female predominant, which is interesting.
The one question that has come up, there are other apps, the Biobank app and the Royal Free app. Are those any usefulness at all?
I don't know. I mean, I think ours is the largest one other than the NHS app. And I think ours is the only one that's doing daily logging and interacting with the participants, because we do feedback data on your area, how many people infected today in your particular area, and that's why we've managed to retain people on the app, because more than any others, because it's quite a hard job, completing this app, having 1.5 million people doing this for the last 6 months, and so it's been a full-time job engaging with that group. So the other ones will be much smaller, and there were about a dozen apps at the beginning, because obviously it wasn't a particularly original idea. And it just ended up being survival of the fittest. Some were shut down by the government, others just lost traction, and sometimes it was a bit of luck about which one got shared on social media. But
that's one of the questions that really arise often in this conversation is, did Sweden get it right? And how do you respond to that one?
What I liked about the Swedish approach was that there was actually an open debate about it. So they did discuss the downsides, the upsides, the economic impact, and came up with a sort of a politically, discussed out agreement that they knew they would get some deaths, but they knew that the they wouldn't be shutting down things as much, and the economy wouldn't take as much of a hit. And I think broadly they have got it right, and I really like the fact they engaged with the public, and it wasn't just, you know, behind closed doors discussion. And I think the reason that there's a theory that the reason they did have more deaths than their other neighbours was partly because they had a very mild flu season the year before, and that seems to be another factor that complicates all this comparison between countries. Is that, you know, the UK had a mild flu season in 2019, and so we were due a bad one this year, and that's partly what's happened. So I think, you know, time will tell who was right, but I like the way they had an open debate about, you know, the economy, infections, education, against, you know, the inevitable deaths in the very vulnerable elderly. And I think that was a grown-up debate that I'd love to have. We would love to be in a country that did, you know, trust its people to have those discussions.
Yeah, well, I've got a couple more quick ones. One is the question about face masks. The question about face masks is partly the usual question about face masks, but also the question that on the app, on apps, the questions are about whether you wear face masks or not. And you could say you never wear face masks, but that's because you avoid the settings where face masks are required. So you could get false positives and false negatives along the way.
Yes. Well, obviously, we introduced a face mask question a couple of months ago, and quickly worked out that it had problems. And so I think we've taken it off yesterday, so that we don't. So we were trying to come up with another one, but it ends up taking about 10 minutes to fill it in. It's so complicated to think about all the scenarios. So we might just ask a question about, you know, are you taking more risks than, you know, the average person, you know, yes or no? Because as you said, if you never leave the house, you don't have to, you know, you may not need a face mask, but if your job is a bus driver, you know, you may. So it is a problem trying to get these questions right. And it's always a challenge in our app to ask questions, but also not waste people's time, because if you extra 10 seconds, you'll get, you know, 10,000 people deleting the app. Yeah. So it's a real balance between trying to encourage the science without putting off people. So that's why you have to think of it from an app designer's point of view, some of these questions, and we don't get them all right. But, you know, everyone liked doing the vitamin question, by the way, because everyone's very interested in the answer to that one. So they didn't, and we had 2 million people actually did a food frequency questionnaire, which took 15 minutes. So it's the largest ever dietary survey done. So people will like it, but they wouldn't do that every day. So I think that's the question.
Are you asking any questions also that look at thrombotic and microembolic phenomena at all within it, or is there a way of doing that?
Not really. So we're going to add some extra questions on things like tachycardia and other more cardiovascular symptoms. But we're basically looking at the symptoms people report under the section other, and if they're common enough, we add them in.
We add them in.
But we're not going to do rare stuff that we can't validate. That's the problem.
Right. And you need the numbers to validate.
Yeah, it's all a numbers game, and because it's self-reported, we do need big numbers. Otherwise, people won't believe us. And that's really important.
There's prediction. You've got prediction about severity. You know, the ones that predict. But what about prediction for the kind of cytokine storm kind of situations? The ones where they go rapidly into a decline, into a deterioration.
Well, our app is not very good for that, because clearly, if you think about it yourself, you know, if you've got the symptoms and you're logging in the app and then suddenly you can't breathe and you've gone blue.
Yes.
You're not going to keep logging as you go through casualty and into intensive care. So we lost a lot of people, or we didn't know exactly what happened to them in those scenarios. So ours, there are lots of data on ICUs, and we're not competing with that space, but there's very little data about what's really happening in the population for 99% of the people, and that's where we're focusing.
Right, right. So it's on that focus, and therefore producing as large a possible sample at that level.
Yeah, and this is the data that people can relate to, because most people are going to have mild symptoms with this, and they want to know how long those symptoms will last. Is it associated with anything? Should I be worried, or is this a sign this is a mild disease? But above all, people really do need to know the 20 symptoms of COVID and be educated and spread the word. And that's really what I think this app's main thing it should be doing is I want everyone to look at it, look at our infographics and become experts and spread the word. And, that way, that's how 4 million people did this, who are citizen scientists, doing things because, the NHS and government wasn't ready to do it. So hopefully you guys out there will keep, if you're not already downloading it, do it, spread the word and be ambassadors for us.
Tim, you said at the beginning that you were going to give us till 9 o'clock. I think we're stepping over that mark already. So I just want to say thank you very much, that the responses flowing in have been symptomatic of how fascinating a discourse this has been, and how everybody, I think, has learned an enormous amount. Many thanks.
Great, thanks. Thanks. Great questions, everybody. Take care, stay safe, and keep logging.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Night.